How's your week going, man?
It's going well. How about yours?
Pretty good.
Good.
It's good when you don't have a lot to complain about, right?
Yeah. And it's good to see you. It's been a while. I'm glad you're back.
I know, man. I know. Just, you got to take care of life, right?
I'm trying to I do the same thing every day. I know what we're talking about. So I share in that suffering with you in that way.
Yeah. I think we got some other people on. So I think, yeah. Hey, guys. Look at you. Good to see you. I love your hairstyle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And thanks for hosting. Like, what would I have done if you didn't step up, sir?
Am I really? I mean, I think it's we're gonna probably just play it by ear today and let him, I mean, Eric's got a big shoes. I can't fill that or even pretend to do it.
You've got a size that's worthy of listening to. So
yeah, so it looks like we've got 4 people on. So we'll probably just go ahead and get started. So today we're talking about letter 7 on crowd. I think last week somehow it had gotten mixed up and we started to talk about crowd when it was supposed to be this week. So as everybody on this call probably realize, I mean, I'm a big Seneca guy, right? So everything I talk about is really based on Seneca's writings. So today it's probably not going to be any different, but it's mostly going to be, an open discussion, obviously. So from a crowd perspective, I think one of the questions that comes to mind, I mean, Seneca talks about this 2,000 years ago, right? And so one of the things that that comes to mind, in the century we're in, is how do you really define crowd, right? 2,000 years ago, Seneca, when Seneca talks about crowd, especially in his letter to Lucilius, he was really referring and actually laid out an example. And one of the examples he laid out was, he wanted a place to relax and just kind of have a good time. And he decided to go to the Coliseum, right? And it really wasn't what he expected it to be. And to be honest with you, I'm asking myself, I mean, come on, Seneca, I mean, given where you are in society, in the Roman society, you got to know what happens at the Coliseum. However, he went there hoping that he was going to be able to relax. And so he came away extremely angry and upset because of, what took place. And so he wrote to Lucilius, and he talked about, how crowd can really influence you, right? He specifically warned about the dangers of crowd because it really, it acts on impulse, right? With no reason. And so the people who are part of that body tend to kind of get swept up in that emotional happenings. And then their opinion and everything kind of change to be in line with, with the crowd. And so when I thought about it, I asked myself, so what do we consider to be crowd today, right? Given that we've got internet, we've got Meetup, we've got all these things that we participate in. And so, where do we sort of where are we influenced, and what are the crowds that influence us today, right? And you start thinking about the news media, you start thinking about all these other things, social movements, and even I myself, and I think all of us on this call can probably recognize areas in our lives where we are influenced by what's going on today. Social events, political events, what's going on social media and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to sort of open it up and ask, so what are some of the crowd that you believe that you get caught up in, and how do you think it influences you and how you deal with that? Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Thanks for that, Mike. I think about that a lot, actually. I also, because we're humans in general are very social animals. So we hunger for that crowd thing. So it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing, where I always notice that like I seek the crowd and I seek like connectiveness, either in a small intimate setting or a large group setting. And then usually it's kind of interesting, even if I go and sometimes I seek out things that are like what I expect to be in accordance with my moral guidelines that I set for myself. Sometimes it's a loss anyway, because if I'm able to look back on it, sometimes I don't even get the value I wanted out of it. And I think maybe that's like an expectation thing. And I think that for me, if I'm with a crowd, maybe expecting is really the problem, and maybe just setting like a low bar of like, okay, if I'm going to go out to the bar, or if I'm going to go out to like the library, or if I'm going to go to a Stoicism call at 10 a.m., tempering expectations is definitely important, because I think that, like you brought it up with like Seneca, he went out to the Coliseum and he was like hoping for a certain result from his endeavor, or like his kind of journey out in that, and he did not get what he wanted. And maybe his letter is just kind of like a confession that like he's expecting a certain thing, and then crowds are bad, and nothing is all good or all bad. Like maybe he didn't get what he wanted as far as like a certain outcome goes, but he did get that connectiveness that maybe that he did hunger for. As someone who's like an intellectual, I think maybe he could have been a little more introverted and was a little too much in his thoughts. And as we know, that humans don't really thrive in that environment all the time. So for me, like I work from home, and then my side job as a personal trainer, like I'm dealing with people a little bit more. So I feel like I'm always hungering that crowd a little bit more. And one thing that I've done personally is like I go out to bars and stuff like that, but I don't want to drink, because I do want that human connectiveness, but alcohol has provided such little utility to me entirely. So that's one thing that I'm working through, is that I'll go out to these excursions and I make it what is only good for me, because only I can do that. Like I can't rely on anybody else to do that. Even like really the only thing I can rely on like the venue owners to do is just like keep the area safe, like just make sure that people aren't fighting and shooting each other, or like the food that they're serving is like a certain quality. But I can't expect anything of other people. I can only expect certain things of me. So I just mainly tempering expectations is my current endeavor right now, and then to minimize mind altering substances, and I'll include sugar and salt and butter in that too, but mainly alcohol. So that's what I'm working on right now, Mike. And it's just like anything else. I feel like for me, it's like easy initially, and then as I go on, I'm like, I could have one beer. Like I have that thought
Yeah,
in my head.
exactly.
You know, it's just like a constant battle, man. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I know. Anyone else?
Hey, Mike, how are you this morning?
Doing my best.
You are doing well, sir. Well, for me, I am an introvert, so I don't know if I want to phrase it as I avoid crowds more so than I select the crowds I go into, because I am extremely stimulated. And I think that is any Stoic, if you are questioning everything that comes into your mind. And so that would be the main reason why I select the crowds I go into. And I've always been an introvert, so perhaps a lot easier for me to do so, that I'm feeling like it's so much fun with myself. Like there's so much happening here. We have to, get through that first, and then I could move on. So I'm someone who likes to rest in thought quite often. I do it daily, either through journaling, through like visually, through like a vision board, through even when I exercise, I do hot cold therapy, like Ralph was talking about, through like denying yourself sugar or salt. I'm vegan, but I eat like an athlete, even if I'm not actually competing this season. I will be competing again, so I have to not put myself too much in the doghouse that there's too much work to catch up on. So I'm just maintaining that, and that takes up all my time. So right there, where's the crowd? Select it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think that when I really think about this, you know, it whatever it is, right? The human inclination really is to, is to be a part of it, right? That's just the human reaction. And then the question becomes, you know, neglecting, it forces you to neglect your individualism, right? So we are individuals, and obviously we are practicing Stoic, you know, and so in the letter, in especially this letter to Lucilius, Seneca was kind of warning him and reminding him to remember that individualism, right? And I think I find myself, because again, and that's one of the reasons why, at the top of the discussion, I said, how do we define crowd today? Because, we may say, okay, when we go to the bar, it's easily definable that we're in a crowd at that point. Or when we go to the mall, or if we see a protest or whatever, that's easily definable, right? But, in today's electronic world, I think it becomes a little bit more gray in terms of what a crowd is. And, if you go to the news media, or anything at all online, there's such thing called clickbaits, right? And those clickbaits is to get a reaction from you so you can do something, right? And to me, even reading the book, a book called Crowd by Gustav Le Bon, where he really talks about the concept of herd mentality and the mob mentality. And a lot of times it really doesn't necessarily have to do with you being part of a crowd, right? But this clickbait and this ability that the media and social media have to force you into, well, not force you, but encourage you into clicking certain things, and then it takes you into a spiral. And the question now becomes, how do you pull yourself from that, maintain your individualism, and become steadfast to, to the virtues that you learn as part of Stoicism. And for me, for sometimes I'm sitting on a sofa right now, right? And this is a loft living room area. And I have 3 beds in my house, excuse me saying this. I have 3 beds in my house, and I sleep in my sofa more than I sleep in my bed. So I tend to sleep a lot right where I am, because I live alone. But I find myself laying right here on my iPad, and one thing takes you to another. And then you realize that those things beginning to influence your thought, right? And so the question now, you have to get up and say, how do I pull myself away from that? Because what Ralph was talking about is very valid, but Ralph is talking about something that's really tangible, right? I can go to the bar and I can refuse drinking, I can refuse certain things, but those are real tangible things, right? But the things that I believe are more dangerous are the things that are influencing your behavior. And I think Seneca called it, it's an unconscious, I think I wrote it down somewhere. Seneca called it unconscious influence. How do you deal with that? Because that's really what's going to change your behavior. Any idea on that? Any suggestion? How do you deal with that? The unconscious influence that you pick up from these areas.
I like what you brought up there, Mike, where it's like it's more of like an abstract idea, like you said, and I've done it too. I'll be on the couch and I'm watching one YouTube short, and they're like, what, a minute at the most. And on paper, it's not a big deal, but then it keeps replaying. And then there's that flip of the dopamine where it's like, oh, what's going to come up next? And the YouTube algorithm is kind of curtailed to me. So usually it's going to give me something I like. And if it doesn't, then I can just re-roll the dice. It's almost like the gambling mechanic. So it's kind of tough because, like you said, the delayed effect of the negative aspect of that is so delayed. Like if I drink some alcohol and I have too many drinks too fast, like I'll be hammered and I'll feel it like within an hour, which is kind of a good thing because at least I get that instant feedback. But if I miss 2 hours of my day because I'm looking at 2 YouTube shorts, I might not see the effect of that for weeks later, where it's like, oh, well, maybe I missed an ab workout or I was late to work. And like maybe my boss is creating like they're keeping like a track record of me showing up to late, and it's because I'm watching YouTube shorts, you know? And so that's a really good thing. And the only thing I can think of is maybe like self-parenting and practicing more mindfulness, kind of like that coping ahead of time. That's something that I've talked about in therapy, where like if I know that it's reasonably likely I'll wake up in the morning, turn on my phone and go right to YouTube shorts. If I'm practicing mindfulness either ahead of time or like prior, like later in the day, kind of like it's like the mental workout relative to Gay's diet or exercise routine, is I'm preparing, or anybody's preparing their mind for those kind of like emotional dopamine seeking type of activities that'll make you pursue those things that you know are your like weak points. And then sometimes it, depending on where you go in your mindfulness training, you'll decide like, all right, well, I just can't have YouTube on my phone, or maybe I'll set an app to like kind of make YouTube only accessible for certain amounts of time throughout the day, or
Mhm.
maybe not even turning my phone on at all in the morning, just so that I know I don't even touch it. And then using mindfulness to kind of find that preference. And within there's a crowd of that too. Like, how do you self-control? Some people choose to
Right.
self-control in a very extreme form of like, I'm not even going to turn my phone on, or maybe like kind of a more passive, like, all right, well, I'll give myself an hour YouTube every day and then restrict it with like another app, use a different app to combat the more harmful apps. So I
Right.
think that's the individuality that you had mentioned. How do you choose to do that? Just like if you, me, and Gay went to the bar, and maybe my extreme vice is drinking, hers is sugar, yours is like salt, and maybe, I don't know, dancing or whatever, like
Mhm.
knowing like, all right, I'm like, I like to dance for unlimited amount of time, but I don't have the fucking time of the day to do that. So I'm going to set an alarm on my phone to vibrate when I've danced for a half hour, because that's something that I can reasonably tolerate through my mindfulness practice. So
Right.
that's what I've been trying to do, is to cope ahead of time with mindfulness and other mindful activities, so that when I'm sitting there on the phone, it's like, fuck, I've watched 5 YouTube shorts. It's time to hop off.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you, Ralph. So we've got Linda, Michael, and Linda. We've
Hi.
got two people to hand up. Go ahead, please.
Um, yeah, I hate to bring up the vaccines, but I won't get into like the specifics, but that's just because this is the best example I could come up with. But when I first was like hearing, well, when I was hearing about it, the media made it sound like it was really polarized. But when I actually talked to people, everyone was like in the middle. Like most people were like, oh, I'm scared to get COVID, but I'm scared to get vaccinated. And then some people were like, well, I don't really want to take the risk with the vaccine, but I want to travel, or I want to do this sport, or etc. So there was maybe two people that I knew that were extremely against it, and two that were extremely for it. So it was completely different than how they portrayed like the majority opinions, at least directly with, compared to directly.
Right.
So then, and then to make a decision, like I would listen to both sides, and I thought, well, I don't really trust, like online, like I'd say, I don't really trust either side. Like they both have good points, but they just seem like they're just saying what they can to support their view, right? So I don't really know who to trust. So I've listened to people that are kind of in the middle, but then even if they chose a side, I would just listen to people who weren't polarized. Like even if they were for or against it, like I would listen to people who like had compassion for both sides, or weren't continuously blaming, like, but just kind of like would kind of see the complexity of the situation. So that really kept me balanced, because then I actually found out more truths by doing it that way. And like I was still able to listen to both sides, but I felt I was more clear, because like even if I picked a side and I felt that was a truth, I felt like even if I listened to that side that supported my side, I felt like I was going more and more and more to one side. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was influencing me. And I thought, no, I just want to be clear.
Right.
So I would just try to stay with, you know, try to refresh myself with more neutral minded people. So yeah.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you, Linda, is that, I mean, you know, instead of allowing that crowd, if you will, to you know, to influence your decision, what you're doing is you're collecting that information, and then you're applying, you know, your rationality to it to come up with your own decision. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, yeah, like just trying to like reality check, because I mean the media like will basically show you the polarized views, and that's
Correct.
not necessarily like in real life. The people that I talked to, a lot of people were in the middle, and then when I would listen to people online, like I didn't know who to trust, because it was more polarized, like when I would listen to people online. So it was kind of like I had to listen to people who were more who weren't polarized, even if they did pick a side, you know, I would trust their opinion more, because yeah, it's just trying, because you can get carried into a direction, like it could be sort of self-reinforcing. Like even if you pick a side and you really want to be clear and about your facts, like you can get taken further to the edge of that side, like even if you don't really want to, just because it kind of reinforces itself, and then you kind of default, you know, kind of like
right.
So yeah, it's just kind of like trying to keep it.
And can I just jump in quickly, Linda, and say to you, as Stoics, we listen to all sides and then we decide. So you are right to be hearing all of this, and you have to work through the cacophony. That is our duty as Stoics. We listen to everything. So it's a noise, but we're going to make it musical for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Thank you. Michael, I'll let you go.
Thank you. So I think when we look at this letter, right, we can look at it and interpret it harshly of avoid crowds altogether, right? And I think what's important for me is I'm going to hang out in groups that align with my values and align with my goals. But there is a but there, right? And I'll use a Stoic discussion group as an example. And this happened to me recently. So I come into a discussion group and we have 1 hour of great conversation on Stoic principles and Stoic practices, and it's wonderful and it's uplifting. And then there's this half-hour quote unquote social afterwards, where I quickly learn that nobody walks their talk, right? And that conversation devolves and goes down rabbit holes, kind of like when Ralph was talking about watching those YouTube shorts, right? And just going down that rabbit hole. That conversation just goes, and you leave more upset, however you want to define upset, right? Emotionally or otherwise, than you came in. But I'm also reminded here that Seneca, I think it was in the 25th letter, which mainly deals with getting a guide or a mentor, talks about not being in complete solitude, right?
Right.
So if I don't have that calmness, if I don't have, if I'm not really firm in my own practice, you know, in fact, I think Seneca said, I can't quote him chapter and verse, so, but he says something to the effect of, with the way you are right now, you may as well be in a crowd. Right. So in this letter, he's talking about crowds. There he's talking about, and so, but the takeaway from that is the exact same thing. So when I crawl out of my shell, so if I start off solo, if I start off by myself, when I start crawling out, whether it be with 1, 2, or a bigger group of people, I want to look for people who align with, like I already said, my values, my goals, people who uplift me, and sometimes people who challenge me, right? Because
Yeah.
then I could see I can learn things about myself, to continue growing. But I think, to summarize it, the biggest lesson here for me about crowds was choosing wisely, right? And to go to those where something resonates with me, and I grow somehow. I was thinking about, even when Ralph mentioned, and I think Gay mentioned about the sugar. If I'm staying away from sugar, I'm not going to go with my friends to a bakery, right? If
Right.
I'm choosing not to drink, I'm not going to go with my friends to a bar, right? We can go somewhere else. So I think we also have a level of self-regulation.
Yep.
for,
Yep.
I said we, but I have a level of self-regulation for how I participate in a group and what groups I linger around. So thank you for listening.
You're welcome. I don't have the administrative function for this, so please put your hands down so I can tell if you need to speak after you speak. Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, Michael, to your point, and to everybody's points, well taken. I mean, again, the quality of the people we surround ourselves with, right, is really going to determine how we, our character, how we improve our character. And I think that in order for you to become or to be steadfast in those principles around Stoicism, they have to, you have to make sure that those are ingrained in who you are, because that's the only way you're going to be able to resist, the crowd. I think that, but here's the other question I ask, right? Is, to Michael and Linda's point, is, can I, as a Stoic, participate in a crowd or become involved in a crowd and be able to walk away from that crowd, not being influenced by that crowd? And if you can do that, how do you go about doing that? How do you harden yourself against those negative influences? I think that every single one of us on this call, and including myself, well, I'm on the call, I can I can tell you moments in my life where I am influenced by the crowd, right? Because one, I either want to be cool, I don't want to stand out like a sore thumb, and all these things I do to adapt that crowd mentality, to feel like I'm part of something, right? And so, how do you, at our age, harden ourselves from those influences? Ralph, you're up.
That's great, Mike. And I love that question. And I'll kind of reference what Gay had mentioned about, you're in a specific situation, you're intaking stimuli, and then as a Stoic, you decide what works best for you. And Michael talked about it a little bit too, where you kind of choose your group. And I'm gonna answer your question by referencing something I learned in therapy, and also something I do as a personal trainer. Is as a trainer, like, the normal day-to-day workout is usually not that intense, but to keep people motivated in general, there's kind of like something you want to work up to, maybe like a specific skill, or as you might see like athletes do, they have a game on Sunday, they've got the Super Bowl, they've got the World Series, whatever. So the day-to-day practice is relatively not quite that intense, but working up to something allows you to push yourself a little bit beyond what you normally do. And I feel like that we can do the same thing with meditation. That's what I choose to do. So thought diffusion is a type of meditation that I learned from DBT therapy, where basically, and there's a few different ways to do this, but one way that I like is that, like, right now I'm sitting on a couch and my girlfriend's right next to me. So what I do is I imagine myself looking at us sitting on the couch. And whenever I have thoughts, I imagine like I imagine like a little light bulb going off in my head, and I disconnect from the thoughts that are actually happening in my own brain. And I noticed that this can be done almost in any situation. So like, let's say we're at the bar and I don't want to drink and I'm talking to this guy, and let's say he's a super blue Democrat, and I can tell maybe that they're a little emotional, but they do have some logic in what they're saying. I want to be able to listen to what they're saying and disconnect and just observe my emotions independent of what may be happening or what might not be happening, and then try to create logical deduction from that. So practicing that thought diffusion and just meditation in general day to day help just toughen that muscle. And then I'm preparing for that event. On Saturday, I'll know I'll be at Xfinity Live at the sports complex in Philly, which is what I was recently. I knew there'd be temptations to drink. They were celebrating Mardi Gras. So disconnecting from myself when I'm sitting at the bar and the bartender is like, what do you want to drink? And then I disconnect. I imagine that's already happening. I'm coping ahead of time with thought diffusion. I see the bubble in my head, like, all right, I would like one Tecate, or I want a land shark. And then there's the other thought bubble. I'll just take a water or like a club soda or something else. And I just disconnect from that. And I didn't have to deal with any stressful talks in that time. But I think just preparing for that and doing that every now and then is a great way as like challenging yourself to see what happens. And if I have a stressful conversation with somebody, as long as like nobody got hurt or murdered and the cops weren't called, it's probably fine. Like maybe I'll say something a little emotional, but I feel like failure is a good metric for where I'm at in that space. And I love the thought diffusion thing. I do that meditation at least once a week. Sometimes I do it twice a week, but I would highly advise you guys just checking out just to see what it's about, because it's brought me utility. If you do, great. If not, I understand. But that's something that I've done a lot. And that's probably my top 2 type of meditation I've been doing right now.
I'm going to write that down because I don't think I've heard about that before. Unfortunately, I'm not as smart as you guys. Thought diffusion.
You're a genius. Don't stop. Don't do that.
I gotta make sure that I don't forget that. Hey, Ralph, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Michael, you're up.
One of the things, well, what Ralph was talking about was a DBT technique called fly on the wall. So if you want to search that out, you could find that looking for that up. But to answer your question and to pair this with Gay's Stoic wine, like we always pair things with wine. Like I was talking about, so you hang out with this group and you're there for an hour or so, like talking, and then that extra half hour afterwards. And one of the things that typically comes up is, well, not typically, but may come up is like gossip, right? And so you're asking the question, how do I leave this gossipy group, whatever the gossip? I'm just using a very general term here, right? But how do I leave this and deal with it? And I can look at that and say, okay, I could take this gossip as an irrational thought or belief. And how does it change my behavior, right? Does it upset me about myself? Does it upset me about somebody else? I'm sorry, how's it my feelings, not my behavior? And from a behavior standpoint, am I going to let this affect how I treat somebody or something else as a result of that information? And so I can analyze that, that's what Gay was kind of getting into, right? I could start looking at my different thoughts and my different beliefs about something. And even if it's the shittiest thing ever that's going on, I could still use it as an opportunity for growth for myself, right? I can't getting other people to grow or changing their mind is well out of my control, but what's in my control is, hey, I learned something new about myself today. I could hear this gossip. I'm just keeping with that scenario. I can hear this and not react.
Right.
Or if it caused me some reaction, I can process that and deal with it. So the next time I face this, I could be stronger. As Seneca always said about being calloused, right? Something keeps happening so much that we can become calloused to it. So I just wanted to kind of integrate those two where my mind went.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And I think those are some really good examples of how you can sort of harden yourself against the, what I would like to call the contagion of these, mob mentality and these group influences. Anyone else want to take a shot at that? Again, the question is about how do you harden yourself against, the mob mentality? Go ahead, Gail.
Okay, so I wrote a couple of notes down from what you all said. So I know you're saying how to be discerning when exposed to crowds. And I would use an infinity loop. So the infinity loop should not be any longer than 90 days. And you record what you've taken in and how it has influenced you. And then you adjust whatever you want or what you don't want, because it's an oxymoron to understand that can you be influenced by crowds by being in the crowd? Well, of course you can be, but of course you as well cannot be. We can be because we are the sum of our experiences. So no matter what we do, we become it. But you choose how you will react to it. So in the very same way that you could be alone, like to Michael's point, and be very crowded in the mind because you have negative thoughts. Negative thoughts is not what you want. So we know that Seneca said, what I advise you to do is not to be unhappy before the crisis comes. So everyone knows here that I'm a Pollyanna, so I'm happy the most. So I'm very happy for that. I'm not even doing it on purpose. So just out of default, when my mother pushed, this is my defense. I just had it. It was an inborn. So I am ready for crises in a happy mode. And when crisis arrives, I'm still happy because I'm in a divorce right now and I'm still saying, well, can't afford it, but don't know where I'll get it, but it's still good. And
Right.
then as well, we have to have the discipline. So with health and that, and so how Ralph is saying, okay, go, but be discerning when you are in the bar, choose not to drink. And a lot of people who are recovering alcoholics must do that for the rest of their lives. So we know that it is possible to actually stay away from the bar completely, or then say, I have built enough strength and enough muscle and willpower to go into that situation. Now, if you don't have the sickness, easy. Or I'm saying it should be quite easy because I could go into a bar and not drink. Anytime I'm training, I'm not doing anything recreational. But can I do recreational anything anytime outside of that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I will get funner. Okay. So yeah. So, and like you want to move around. So another practice for Michael, when I say the infinity circle or to practice it, is as well for physical. So if you have 3 bedrooms, go into each bedroom every so often throughout the day. And that will give you that neat workout where it's a non-exercise activity. So you don't know you're doing anything to stay physical because, hey, I just have to go into that bedroom and I have that one. And you have the opulence of options, Mike, 3 bedrooms. Wow.
Well, the good thing is that I only have one area to clean up. So people always come to my house and said, why is your house so clean? Or always so clean? Well, I only got one area to clean up because that's where I sleep all the time. But anyway, thank you guys. You said one thing, SRI, I'm going to let you come up for a minute, come up in just a minute. I just want to acknowledge your hand up since you've been with us since the beginning. So I want to acknowledge one thing that you just said, right? And I noticed that this came up before in this discussion, but that's really, really important. So I want to call it out, where you said, don't get upset before the problem, right? And so you're getting upset because there's a sense of anticipation, right? And then this goes right back into something we talk about is, where Mark Twain says, the phrase is, I'm an old man who have seen many troubles, none of which ever happened, right? And that goes right back to that, is because you're basically stressing yourself out about something that may or may not happen, right? So like you said, wait for the problem to arise before you deal with it. And I think that will save ourselves a lot of grief if we do that. SRI, I'll let you go.
Hi, it's Shri. So can you hear me?
Tree, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You totally butchered it. No problem. So yeah, I think these are all great concepts, and something that I am is I'm an extrovert, but for the way of life that I have led, for some reason I haven't had a lot of crowds around me, and also being a mother, it was a lot about like just going around and running around with kids, and I'm going through a divorce right now. So I can see what helped me is just actually not having that external crowds, not having so many crowds, because I'm able to reflect on myself. Had I had too many crowds, I don't think I would have been able to reflect. I would have been swayed through, whatever is coming through my way.
Mhm.
So it's a lot about the concepts that we talked about, like being selective and being able to decide, and the thought diffusion, that's a great point, because you're putting yourself not in others' shoes, but out of the room, out of the box, and actually looking at it. One thing that does help me, because there are some really bad days where you're depressed, or like Mike, like you said, you're looking at your phone or you're looking at TV and you're like, what do you do? I had those moments, and what I am trying to do right now is plan, like have a plan, not just for my day, but for my whole month. Like, what am I going to do during this time? What am I going to, because there's a game plan, so I can immediately snap my finger and say, okay, I have something else to do, rather than, because it's hard. I'm watching Netflix series back to back, and I'm like, I don't want to be doing that same thing all day, right? But just having that. So I bought a calendar, and I'm going to write down in my calendar what I'm going to do, maybe hour by hour or by block, morning, evening, afternoon. So that way I'm disconnecting myself. And just to answer, what crowd to me is anything but me right now. Right now, that's the way it is for me. Anything but me is a crowd for me. So I am just trying to observe, and I come back and I say, it's okay to say no after I've said yes, because I've grown up in a culture where you're like, oh, you have to stand up on your word. Once you say yes, you have to like do that. And I'm like, no, I'm not following that. I'm going to come back and say no. If I'm going to try to meet the same group again, I should be able to say no if that's what I want. So yeah, just a few things, but I think this group is having really good topics. So thank you for
Thank
having
you.
this session.
Thank you. Shri, I really, really just love some of the things that you've laid out. And I can give you an example. An example is that I am divorced for about 8 years. And when I was married, we were married for 14 years. And yeah, we were married. Well, actually, we were together for 7 years, then married for 7 years. So and then we got divorced, and we had a beautiful, beautiful marriage. Beautiful. Matter of fact, I would love to meet someone like my ex-wife, to be honest with you. But here's when the trouble started. After she had our son, she asked me if she could be a stay-at-home mom, and I said, sure, you can be a stay-at-home mom. But at the time, she only had a high school degree. And I said, well, you can be a stay-at-home mom, but the only requirement is that you go back to school. And she did, right? She didn't want to, but she did. And so, but what that did was gave her exposure to all these other things that she was just never a part of. So she would go to the park and she would meet friends and she would have all these kinds of stuff. And then she started come home with those influences, right? And so our loving home became a battleground, because she would then start telling me about this and start telling me about that. She would wake up, I'll be heading out the door at 7 o'clock in the morning, and she's right behind me with a young baby. And I would say, where are you going? She said, I'm going to my friend's house. So she just got completely sucked into that crowd mentality and starting to really become influenced. And that's really what caused our marriage to to dissolve. And so it really means a lot to me, you know, in how we keep that out of our lives, and how we really focus on preventing those things from really influences us and gets into us and destroy our lives, you know. And so that's the reason why this topic is so important to me, because I am a living example of how that can really, you know, influence your life to a point where it really disrupt it in a major way. And so,
Can I say
yeah,
something too?
I'm sorry?
Can I say something about that as well? What you're saying right now?
Sheree, can you put your hands down?
It's,
Oh.
you know how you have, they, like, I guess Shree was the one that was saying it. She wants to be able to change her mind. Well, yes, of course, because when she says, what we used to say, my word is my honor. I still agree that that is a correct term, but you can change your mind, because it was Plato, I believe, who said everything evolves, therefore nothing is true. So as you will still support whatever now you are saying now. So if it was yes before, but you have new information, you're being discerning, and now it is no. And you're going to stick to that. You don't let other people influence where you stay, you move where you have to go. And Mike, we are twins with divorce. I was 14 years married and I was a housewife.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that, Gay. I mean, I wish we weren't twins, you know, in that area, but you know, it is what it is. It's life, right? But to be honest with you, again, you know, I just have to lean on Seneca and lean on some of the advice that he gave to Lucilius around crowd, and you know, and how you really have to stay vigilant, because I think that it's important, and I really like what Shree says about the crowd being anything but her, right? And the real value, and I also like the fact that she also said that she's she's an extrovert, right? And so it brought this up to mind is I think that being influenced by a crowd is probably more, it probably affect an extrovert more than it does an introvert, because by nature, an introvert may stay away from that. Not that they cannot be influenced, you know, because given the definition of crowd in today's society, you know, you can lay on your sofa like me and be influenced by the crowd as well. But I think it probably is more challenging for someone who is extrovert, who has that, you know. So I do, Shri, I do have a great deal of respect for your ability to do that. I think that would be challenging for me. I think I'm somewhere between extrovert and introvert. I mean, I can operate in both environments, but I'm not a full extrovert, because I don't have to go out there and get involved, or I don't really have that innate need to do that. It, you know, and like I said, it's really a challenge every single day, because the noise is there. You know, the media try to ratchet everything up to get your attention. There's always things out there, Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, you know, Proud Boys movement. I mean, you name it, it's out there, right? And sometimes we are a part of society, right? And I think that one of the things when I read this, you know, I mean, again, you know, you know, I don't think I am quite, but I'm really getting there to be a student of Seneca. One of the things that really surprised me when I read this was I was kind of disappointed with Seneca, to be honest with you. I was like, I mean, Seneca, come on, you know, went to the games and you were upset. You know what I mean? You know, you think that Seneca would be hardened against this kind of stuff. And so what it really says to me is that it doesn't matter, and that's why Seneca took the time out to say, you know, he wasn't a sage. right? And that may be something that is unattainable, being a sage. But the reason why it's necessary to have, the idea of a sage is to always say, I can do better. Is to always try for something, because if you get to a point in your life where you think that you're now the man and you've gotten to the pinnacle of whatever it is, then you start becoming complacent, and you start opening up yourself for a lot of things, a lot of undue influence. So the idea of having a sage and having that goal, what would a sage do? And that perfection that is unattainable is really important. It's almost like a Christian saying, what would Jesus do, right? I mean, I can never be like Jesus, but what would Jesus do in this situation? So I think it gives you an aspiration. But I mean, I don't know how to really say that I am fully hardened against the influences of society and in various way that it presents itself. I try to do it every day. I try to be, vigilant, because you have to be vigilant and recognize when those influences are trying to infiltrate your own life. Ralph, I'll let you go.
Thanks, Mike. I love what you said there. And I think about that too. And the one, like everybody is, you're trying to look for that stagehood or trying to push for that. And the only thing I can think of is that everybody is trying to do the best that they can in the time that they have in the specific situation. And I love the quote from Tony Robbins, and I might actually butcher it, is that pretty much everything that everybody does is an expression of love or a cry for help. So whenever, like if I'm at the bar where I see somebody like housing and they're just chugging a lot of beer, I feel like they're looking for love and they're crying for help. Or if two people are in an argument, they might be just scared and they're both crying for help. So whenever I'm in any social situation, maybe if I'm in at the bar and I'm practicing my non-drinking abilities and fly on the wall thought diffusion abilities, or if I'm around a crowd of people like you guys where I align very closely, we're all just crying out for help and looking for love. And that might be just like an over extreme polarization simplification of what is actually happening, but that allows me personally to have a great compassion for whatever's happening. So like you mentioned, Proud Boys, like, yeah, they're like a bunch of guys with like assault rifles that are real burly and scary looking, but what is the purpose of harnessing all that power and being around people that look like you and think exactly like you? For me, I think it's just a cry for help. They're a little scared. They're scared of that us and them mentality where they're not us, they're them. Therefore, we need to fortify our position as strongly as possible. And I used to be really mad at those guys and those people that could harness that kind of hatred. But I definitely had some anger issues, which allowed me to go to therapy and seek help. And in reality, for me, it was just like a lot of fear and anxiety. And I think maybe those guys have the same problem. And I feel like anybody that has a very strong polarized position might have a similar issue where they're just looking for love and they're crying out for help. And maybe they've looked at what maybe the media has polarized in front of them, and maybe they're scared about that and they just don't know how to react. So the accumulation of power and weaponry and mastery and more numbers usually makes people feel more safe, whether they're introverted, extroverted or not. So for me, whenever I'm out in these scenarios and just talking with you guys electronically, I'm just looking for love, and I'm just trying to cope with this with minimizing as much suffering as I can in this life. And that's all I'm trying to do. So whenever I'm out with people and I know that they're talking to me and maybe somebody's screaming at me because for some reason I got caught in a political conversation at the bar, they're getting mad at me, I want to detach as emotionally as possible, because maybe this person in front of me had a few too many drinks. They are super angry or upset about something, but I just try to sympathize and empathize with them as much as I can, because maybe they're just scared about something. Maybe that's why they're so angry, because it's hard to be attacked when you're the one showing the power initially. And that's what I would share on that.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely, Ralph. Thank you so much for that. That is very profound and thoughtful. So thank you a lot. Hey, one thing though, I mean, I know, you said you're sitting there next to your wife or your girlfriend. I mean, she needs to get you out of that bar, man. You're always, you're always, you're always
Maybe you're right.
Michael, you're up. Sri, you're next. You're next, Sri.
When I look at this, I think to myself, you know, like we have today, we have football, baseball, basketball. We're really obsessed with balls. But back then, the gladiator games were the thing, right? That was the sport. And what I read, especially there in that third section, is, you know, he was actually complaining that the gladiator games got
Yep.
worse,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it'd be the equivalent of, let's just take football, playing football, but now as people are running down the field, they're taking out knives and cutting up each other and stabbing each other to get to, you know, make their touchdown, right?
Mhm.
So that's the lesson for today, though, for me in reading this, is going back to how I said earlier, finding groups that kind of align with my goals, values, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Sometimes those groups that I align myself with take a turn, right? People could start backstabbing each other, right? Or it gets gossipy. And I know nothing of the Proud Boys movement, so please, I'm just using this as a pure hypothetical. But what if, just what if they started, I already regret making this comparison. Well, what if they started off with just a bunch of people who had the same kind of values, whether we agree with them or not, right? They just started off as this little herd of people that all shared the same belief system. And then over time, it just got worse to, like it was explained, they're walking around with knives and guns, you know, like it's turned into a more aggressive group, right? And so how can I look at my own groups and the people who I hang out with? So just because I've been hanging out with you for 15 years, right? That relationship, and I would say that relationship, I mean the relationship of the herd or the group, can become toxic, or not just toxic, but it can become not beneficial for me. Like I go to one group, I leave more upset than I go in. And but I, like I said earlier, though, I use it to my advantage. What was it that upset me? I start practicing my dichotomy of control, you know, all my different things that I can do. But it's just, and I've decided, I guess I should say, I don't keep going back because I'm not a glutton for freaking punishment. But I've decided that I'm not, okay, I'm done, right? You know, I've gone to this group for some time, and it's just really devolved and has not become what it was originally intended to do. So I think, and you weren't necessarily doing this, Mike, and so, but I wouldn't rest on the fact that he was at the gladiator games because that was the thing to do at the time. It's his biggest complaint was, what has it become now, right? People, instead of voluntarily going into that ring or that arena, people were being thrown into that arena, right? And so it was so what should have been relaxation, you know, what should have been watching wrestling effectively turned into watching a fight to the death. And so I'm not leaving to talking like, oh wow, that was a real cool wrestling match, or as we know, Epictetus loved to talk about boxing, right? You know, I didn't leave watching this really cool game. I left watching a bloodbath. I left more disturbed than I came in. And so I think my summary there is just, we can look at the people we hang with today in the groups, because see, a lot of our talk today in this group has been about what we do individually on our own, you know, but the real topic, not topic, I'm not wronging anyone, but the real topic is, what do we do when we're in a group? So
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Michael. Yeah, I'm sorry. Michael, were you finished?
yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I thought I cut you off. Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, you know, I think where I said I was disappointed was, you know, the Coliseum or the Colosseum, you know, whether because at that point, I think that they were then start bringing, I think slaves in and just cutting their throat and laughing and all that kind of stuff. But I think where I felt like I was disappointed was that the Colosseum was really about killing people, right? I mean, people would just generally fight to the death in the Colosseum. So I think, but I do take your point. I do take your point very well. I think though, Shri, I'm gonna give you turn over to you in just a moment. But I think when you think about these groups that are out there, and regardless of how people get involved in it, whether it's a physical group or a virtual group or whatever, there's so many times, right? You hear people talk about their regret and how they kind of got sucked into it, right? And to the point where, people, disavow the group. And then I go back and I look and I said, if you were using some of the rational thinking that Linda had mentioned, earlier in the call, then, you'd be able to make a rational decision as to whether this, you needed to be involved in this or not. But Michael, your point is well taken. I really appreciate the statement. It's very logical. And again, like I said, it's, I respect it. Shri, I'll let you go. And I think then we're going to start wrapping up. Shri, you're up.
And then me too. I don't know how to put my hand up.
Okay, Shri after you, then Gail after Shri.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to say that when we talk about like the olden times, the amount of people and the amount of groups and gatherings that used to happen were on a smaller scale, even though we think they were, but they were on a smaller scale, probably not so frequent. If you compare it to currently we are just bombarded with like people and groups and notifications. So that's where it becomes very challenging for our human brain, which is not adapted to that kind of a scenario. Like we are not able to handle it. And that's where I, as being a parent of 2 kids too, I try to self-parent myself and say, I don't have to be right every single time.
Right.
I don't have to be right every single place that I go to. And that's okay. Because what happens is it leads you into a pressure. And I have been that people pleaser. Then you come back and you are so confused. You don't have the time to sit down and reflect. You don't have this time to sit down and say, oh, I could have said this. Let me try that next time. For that to happen, it has to be at a minimum level of interaction or a minimum level of like, so it's very defined group, what Gabe was talking about, it's very defined group. And then I feel like when I go into a group, people are just trying to express. And that was Ralph's point, like people are either just crying out for help or they're looking for love. Nobody is asking you to, is asking for our buy-in. They're just merely looking for somebody to listen to you. And all you do as there, like I go in, I'm merely an observer, so I don't get offended. I'm like, yeah, that's your point of view, but I'm going to walk away with my point of view, because all you're trying to do as a human is just trying to express in that moment of time. That's how I feel. I'm just walking around as an observer, and I'm not great at it every day, every time, but I try, and I can try probably successfully because I do bare minimum what I can do, not too much. And
Appreciate it.
Yeah, if it starts bothering, I just turn off my phone.
Appreciate that. All right, thank you so much. Sure, thank you so much. So before I let you go, Gail, I want everybody to think about this, and this is the last question before we wrap up. And I'll just call on everyone, and then we'll go. I think about, Gail, you'll go last since you're going to be talking next. Think about just in a few words what you would want to share with the group in terms of step that either you might be taking in your personal life to avoid these challenges or to deal with these challenges, you know, or, you know, or what you may suggest based on this discussion that we can do in our daily lives to, you know, to address these serious serious situations. Gail, you're up.
Okay, so I will say that we're talking about the Colosseum and Seneca because I am like the best Stoic because I love being it so much. But so Mike, you see how people died back then from ways that was medicine was administered before that. So when they would let your blood, they were saying, this is going to save you. And Seneca lived through a time where he saw the shift, where it's like, oh no, that's suicide. And it's just administered through medicine. And they realize, no, we can't do that anymore. And as well, when we talk about religion and Marx saying religion is the opiate of the people, that for me, means so much being Stoic because I see you go into a lull. So there is no discernment if you are just following the herd. So that crowd mentality does not work. It is not Stoic. You can't say hurt people. That is not Stoic because I have an awareness campaign that is against pedophiles. So they may have been abused as a child, but they cannot come and reoffend. It is not an excuse. And therefore, the good old boys, whatever it is, they must come to grips with what is actually happening within themselves because it's an internal struggle that they mustn't project it. And if they do project it, that's fine because that's where they are at. But it's up to you as a Stoic to beware of who you are engaging with or what you want to do to be influenced by it, no matter how much we devolve, as Michael was saying with you know, his example. So yeah, we can devolve, but it's like, you don't devolve with it. You're not eroding. You are supposed to make yourself more boisterous. What does Eric always say? It's just to avoid death. Well, okay. Well, going down that rabbit hole isn't going to make you more lively.
Okay, I got you. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Ralph, your last word.
Yeah, I would say thank you, Mike, for hosting this. And then I found that practicing mindfulness and meditation on a regular basis has reduced a lot of suffering for me in a crowd dynamic. I'll just leave with that. Mindfulness, meditation on a regular basis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Michael, you're up.
So I think just looking at everything that I brought up and we all discussed today, the biggest takeaway from this, one of the things I do get from this passage is after that group devolved into what it did, he walked away and said, I won't be back. Right. And so whether I go into a group for the first time, right, or if I'm with a group for a while and it devolves into something else, I can walk away. Right.
Yeah.
I can make the choice. I can Sri had better words and I can't think of how she said it now, but it's just my, I can live with myself, make my choices. But again, that control thing, I don't have to wrong them. They're just not for me. Right. And I can, because if I wrong them, I'm making myself upset. And they're like, oh, those sons of bitches, right? So that says I have some kind of upset in me. I could just go and say, this is not for me. Same thing when we walk out of marriage it sounds easier than it is. And everybody knows this, right? But this is not for me. It's time to go. Or somebody in that relationship says it's not for me. It's time to go. So I think that's really what he's getting at here is discernment. I think you used that word, Mike. I think it was discernment in what groups we attend and what groups have the potential of bringing me down.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you. Well said, my friend. Shri, your time.
I just want to say I'm happy I made this group and I'm going to be in the next session. I enjoyed the conversation, but yeah, I would still continue to plan my day, so I have a plan to fall back onto.
All right, thank you. For me, I would like to add, that I think we, as practicing Stoic, it's important that we remain vigilant. It's it's important that we remain steadfast toward virtues. And I think that we should wear them on our shoulder, on our sleeve. By keeping those principles and virtues in our minds at all times and practicing them in every opportunity we get, I think that over time will harden us, because again, the noise is real, the distractions are real, the crowd, the hive mentality are real. And I don't think that any of us should take that for granted. Remain vigilant, guys, and just stick to your virtues. So thank you everyone for joining. Appreciate you guys humoring me, but and I'll be on the call next week. Have a great week, you guys.
Great job, Mike. Thanks a lot. Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all.
so much.